watch it live in case they didn't come up and saw the calendar invites and all the like. By the way, folks, if you want to get future invitations, you should just subscribe to school16.co, our newsletter, and you'll get it there. But we're just getting set up on YouTube right now so that folks can see what we're talking about here today. Perfect. There you go. It looks like it's there we go. Looks like there's a little bit of a delay there on YouTube, but it is working. And we're going to go back here. All right, we have Quincy here in front of us. So, Quincy.
Actually, let's do our intro, Sergey. Yeah. Why not? This is a live podcast, so let's do our real intro. Ready? All right, hello and welcome back to
The Mentors.
This is Vadim.
And Sergey.
And you're listening to a show where we tell stories of ordinary people that became extraordinary entrepreneurs, leaders, and creators despite lack of experience, money, or connections.
And today we have Quincy Larson of freeCodeCamp.org, a nonprofit that has created one of the largest online resources for people that want to learn how to code just over the last several years. And the reach that you guys have is amazing. Vadim, what are some of the accomplishments of freeCodeCamp just in the last couple of years?
Well, I know for a fact these numbers probably changed already, but 1.1 billion minutes of instruction delivered, over 40,000 people who through freeCodeCamp are actually now working in tech. So these are people that actually got jobs, and you've done most of that through just small donations to the nonprofit. And I know you're doing something a little bit different now to continue to go in the future, but really one of the most impressive things that I've read about it. I remember hearing about you years ago, and it's pretty cool that you kind of came back into our stratosphere through Daryl, who is our advisor, and I know he's working closely with you as well now on freeCodeCamp. But let's go further back in the beginning, because you have such a cool background. You know, you started off in education. I think at some point you were a reporter in China. Then you became one of the youngest school directors, and then eventually decided to start freeCodeCamp. I'm wondering what happened in between that part where I believe that was the last thing you did, right? Before freeCodeCamp was you were a school director, and then you decided to jump all in and start a nonprofit. I want to hear about the calculus there. How did you make that decision? What was the aha moment that made you realize I want to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's a big question. So first of all, thank you for having me on the show. It's awesome. I'm pumped. And I can tell you that I was a school director, and I was just wore a suit to school every day, and kind of like a principal essentially for an adult education program. And our students were not spending as much time as they wanted with the teachers, because the teachers were spending so much time chained to their desks doing paperwork. And I just wanted to, kind of free up my instructional staff and my admin staff to spend more time with students. So I didn't know much about technology, but I was able to Google around and figure out a little bit, enough to become quote unquote dangerous. And what I did was I just learned some very basic tools, Excel, spreadsheet macros, and this tool called Auto Hotkey that let me programmatically click through different government forms and fill things out. Without being at my desk, I could just batch everything up, and it'd go over and copy stuff from the spreadsheet and go and input it into the forms and submit the forms for me. And I was able to do that. And then I was able to take a lot of my, instructional staff and admin staff and just automate it using these very rudimentary tools, very crude, hacky tools. And that really opened my eyes to just how much a single person who is curious, even with a little bit of technological know-how, can turn around and have a big impact in an organization. And so after that, I was like, man, I should totally learn to code properly, and I should try to, build systems to make schools more efficient, is initially what I wanted to do. But after I worked as a software engineer for a while, and there was a long process where I skipped past, but basically I spent about 9 months just hanging out, reading books at the library, and going through different online courses, like MOOCs, if you're familiar with that term, like edX and Coursera, and just learning a whole lot on my own. And then I was able to get a job through just going to meetups and eventually meeting somebody who wanted to hire me, and working that job and learning. And then, I decided yes, I could build a school system that would help make schools more efficient. and then try to sell that to schools or figure out some way to get the schools to actually use it, right? Or I could just try to teach people how to code, like I had learned how to code. And I had all this knowledge of like all the, I guess, weak parts, the redundant parts, the ambiguous parts, the lonely parts of learning the code. And so I was able to use my own kind of journey into becoming a software engineer as a mental model for how I could potentially design a curriculum. And I already knew how to like run organizations, and I already knew how to teach. So it was actually like I was in a really good place to start this organization. And of course, freeCodeCamp is actually like one of many different attempts at creating like a tool to help people learn to code. But it was the one that took off after years of trying. I spent like 18 months building this much more elaborate tool, for example, that nobody ultimately used. So I was able to strip that down and just make it extremely simple. Just freeCodeCamp essentially started out just teaching one thing, which was JavaScript. And that was kind of the insight. It's just simple is better. And taking all the cruft out and just focusing on the most marketable skills, which in my mind are like, JavaScript, Python, SQL, and, Linux basics, things like that. So we were able to focus on that.
Okay, I definitely want to dig into that iterative process of actually trying to build something and then coming up with what ended up becoming freeCodeCamp. But before even that, since at School 16, we are all about helping people understand people's various career paths. Especially, we have a lot of folks that join these events and these podcast recordings that are trying to transition careers. And you talked about how you self-studied for some time and then you were able to get a job by going to meetups. Can you talk a little bit about that? How did you actually get an opportunity by going to meetups?
Yeah, well, I was going to tons of meetups, like almost every night. I would go to a different meetup, and basically every major meetup that there was in like LA or San Francisco or Santa Barbara, which was where I was living at the time. I would just like get on a bus and like go up to San Francisco and sleep on my friend's couch and just go to like lots of events. And one of the events I went to in Santa Barbara, it was like the Santa Barbara Ruby developers event. And I was going to like all kinds of events. So I go like Ruby developer, Java developer, you name it, like anything where I thought I might be able to learn and meet people. And I showed up and it was like 6 people sitting around a bar, drinking beer and just talking. And they were all from the exact same company. And I was the only person from outside the company who showed up. And so they started talking to me, and the CTO of the company is like, "Oh, so you're into like, tell me a little bit about yourself." And I was like, "Well, my background is in operations." And I was thinking operations like running a school, but he was thinking like operations like DevOps. He thought I was a DevOps. And
wow.
So he took me to this big long interview, and about 2 hours into the interview, I think he kind of realized like, "Oh, you're like operations like running a school, not operations like, server ops." DevOps, stuff like that. But he was like, "Well, you seem to know a lot, so we can bring you on as a software engineer." So it worked out. Like it was a misunderstanding essentially. If I just told him I was a school director, there's a good chance that he wouldn't have given me a chance. But he admitted like, "Oh, the term operations is just overloaded because like the COO, the chief operating officer, he's not doing DevOps, he's operating the organization, right?" So he was like, "Yeah, my boss, his title is operations too. So I should have thought more about what you were saying and not been so presumptuous." But it worked out. I stayed there about a year and just I learned even more when I was working on a team. And I learned a whole lot of stuff about agile software development, about how startups are run, because it was like a 50-person startup. Very, very exciting experience. And that set me up very well to be able to kind of like try to start something myself.
Yeah, I love that story. And for folks listening, it's like the fact that you went to these meetups every day, and you don't have to go every day to get opportunities, but that's the amount of time and effort it takes to create opportunities for yourself. So if you're going to events or dialing into these, Zooms and you're still not getting opportunities, just know that sometimes it takes actually putting in a lot more time into meeting people and getting in front of people before you actually get opportunities like this. My first job in New York, when I didn't know anybody, it happened in almost exactly the same way. It was a meetup and I was sitting next to some guy who ended up hiring me.
Yeah, a lot of the best opportunities happen serendipitously like that. But I do want to get into freeCodeCamp. So you mentioned earlier in the conversation that the first iteration of it was, I guess, a more complicated version that really nobody else wanted to adopt, and then you stripped it down to be the original version. But even once you make something simple, you still have to find people that actually want to use it. And you have been, over time, you've been able to build a pretty big community online around your personal brand, it looks like, and freeCodeCamp. But if we can scale it back to the early days, how did you find the first people that really wanted to consume this, essentially this curriculum, this free curriculum they created for people that wanted to teach themselves how to code?
That's a great question. So I'd been blogging a whole lot and just trying to like tweet, like I go to conferences and just, live tweet interesting things people said. I was doing everything I could to try to build up like a Twitter following and become kind of a known quantity in the San Francisco kind of like education technology scene, if you will. So I had already gotten up to like 10,000 Twitter followers by the time that I launched this. So that helped a lot. And also I just got, I got lucky. And I'll be the first to tell you, like, luck plays a huge outsized role in how quickly you're going to get traction with something. And I know people that are much smarter than me, much more charismatic and capable that haven't had a lucky break yet. So just know that it's a indeterminate amount of effort that has to go in before you're going to start getting any sort of, rewards or any sort of like even positive feedback. But I was very lucky. Obviously, like I'm a white male who was born in the United States in the late 20th century, like probably the best time ever to be born in terms of like opportunity and access to like technology and tools and stuff like that. So I already started out life with like tons of advantages. I'm a native English speaker, and I'd already gone to university and graduate school. So I had kind of like I have like an international MBA. I studied in China for several years and then I lived and worked in China for a few years afterward. So I already had a lot, I guess, of sensibility and street cred and everything like that. I had 10 plus years of like experience working in like large corporations and in smaller corporations doing freelance, all these things. So if it seems like I'm going a whole lot on like the past and everything, I think that that's important. You have to really have three things in order to succeed, in my humble opinion. You have to have a reputation, which I'd been building up very hard for like several years. You have to have skills, which I'd also been building up, and you have to have a network, which, like I did a lot of things, like just every time I met like a university professor, I would try to add them on LinkedIn. I just LinkedIn everybody that I met basically. And I would like follow people on Twitter and like DM them and like, just like trying anything I could do to get like some sort of memory of me. If somebody asked me to do something to help them, I did it. Like no questions asked. If somebody's like, hey, I really need to help, like, debugging this thing, I'm like right over to them, because you never know when those sorts of things are going to pay off. And when you're just speculatively building projects and trying to launch them, often, sitting down and just helping somebody with whatever they're working on can be a really good investment of your time. So I would say like all those things maybe increase the likelihood of success, and then just, very aggressively iterating helped. But basically the launch of freeCodeCamp, I can describe right here if you'd like. So it took me about 3 days to build a prototype. Just I took like an existing boilerplate called the Hackathon Starter by Sahat, who is a developer who's quite skilled Node.js developer. And I didn't know Node.js, but I learned enough just hacking on his Hackathon Starter to figure out how to use it. So I got a very basic minimum viable product together in about 3 days. And then the main thing was, it was just a curriculum, like a list of learning resources you could go through. And as you finish them, it would like check them off. It was all self-reported. So you'd be like, I did this. And then the sticky part of it was there was a hip chat room, which if you remember hip chat, it preceded like Slack and Discord and a lot of the other tools. But it was really cool to just hang out in there. And as people came in, like I would be in there and I'd be like, hey, tell me about yourself. Like, what are your near-term goals? That's a really good like open-ended question that you can ask to anybody pretty much, and they'll answer it, because it's specific to them, and it's not like vanilla, but everybody has something they're working toward, and that's a good way to like figure out what they're working toward. So I would just hang out in the chat room while I was coding all day, trying to iterate on the MVP. And whenever somebody joined, boom, I was in there like talking to them and learning about them and just asking questions. And eventually people would like stick around and they would do what I was doing, because I was kind of setting the example of like greeting people and asking them questions and getting them to talk. And so some people started talking in there, and eventually there might be like 10 people in the room at once. And that was awesome. And then it just kind of gradually snowballed from there. And people very quickly started contributing to the code base. People started getting jobs as developers, just going through the resources. Like maybe they were like 80% of the way there. Maybe they had a CS degree, but they just didn't, they didn't have enough exposure to like contemporary tools. And we were just teaching, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Node.js. At the time we were teaching Bootstrap and jQuery, which were still extremely popular and soluble skills. So yeah, we were able to get enough people piling in there and helping one another that it started to get critical mass.
Got it. That's really cool. I wanna find out how you ended up actually, turning it into an organization. But I'm also curious. You spent a good amount of time building this other product that ended up not working, and I think getting good at iterating is like a huge skill set of an entrepreneur. But also getting good at persistence and not giving up on something is also really important. At that point in time, after I think you said you spent like 18 months working on something or whatever it was, what kept you going and decided, even though that thing didn't work, no one used that product, you still wanted to somehow provide this value in the world and still help people learn how to code? What kept you going?
Well, I knew that nothing had really changed since I'd learned to code. The resources were still lacking in various ways. The biggest thing was just like, I knew that if we could create a sufficiently robust curriculum, and if there was like that motivational pressure from other people who are going through it, who can like answer your questions and who can cheer you on, that we could. I mean, I was confident that because I'd been able to do that myself without even having those resources, that we could start, helping people do that. So I think it was just that it was a simple problem in many respects. Like, people don't know how to code. There are all these job openings. If I can help people learn to code, then they'll be able to get those jobs. And so I was just confident that I could make an impact, and that and people were really enthusiastic early on. Like people did not care at all for my previous projects. It was like twisting their arm to even get them to use it. And like, we get like, I think one of the projects I built had like 400 or 500 signups. Almost every single person, like somebody I personally reached out to, please try this. And 100% of those people basically churned. I don't know if anybody ever even returned for a second session. So so that was to see people caring at all. It was huge. And that was just like, that gave me the energy to keep pushing on and keep hoping that we would find product market fit and be able to get things going.
Interesting. So it sounds like then the initial audience you had access to effectively through the blog and the content creation that you were doing over time. Did you have a pretty big Twitter following by then as well? And you basically announced to people that here's this free resource that I have?
Yeah, I had about 10,000 people following me. And one of the big things, I'd read this book like Made to Stick, which is all about messaging and simplifying and basically having as simple a message as possible. Don't mess with Texas, or, enjoy Coca-Cola. I don't know, like very simple messages. Only you can prevent forest fires. That kind of messaging. Like I was like, okay, let's build that into the name. Let's just make the name extremely on the nose and simple to where everybody who hears it will immediately feel like they have a good idea of what it is. So I was like, freeCodeCamp. And the free part is important because immediately people are like, really? Is it free? And a lot of people are like, oh, don't use that name. People are going to think it's spammy. But it's important that it's free, because very few things are truly free. Like maybe they're ad supported or they sell your data or something like that. But freeCodeCamp is truly free in the sense that like you can. We've had people that have gone through it over the course of years and gotten a job and never paid a single thing, and then they're like, hey, Quincy, I really should have donated a long time ago. I'm going to start donating now. So the fact that it's that free, I think is it's the most salient point. Also, like freeCodeCamp's core differentiator is that it's free. There are plenty of awesome learning resources out there, but very few of them that are truly free. And then CodeCamp, like the term coding bootcamp was really in vogue at the time. And there are still coding bootcamps, like you still hear that term, but CodeCamp was also by itself a common term, like kind of like a clinic or like a weekend camp where people get together and code, like in high school. If you go to codecamp.org, I think it's like the Raleigh Code Camp. And after the pandemic, they're probably gonna have some more events and stuff. But like that was a common term as well. So there was already some Google traffic for it. And then a lot of people, for some reason, thought they'd heard of it before when they hadn't. They were like, freeCodeCamp, that sounds familiar. So I don't know, something about the name like made people feel that sense of familiarity, and familiarity essentially is trust and likeliness to use and likeliness to recommend, right? The more people have heard of your brand, the more likely they are to trust it. Exposure, the mere exposure theory, right?
So then you mentioned that's great. Thanks for that background, and I totally resonates, and I agree that a lot of those decisions you made early on seem to have been the right ones. You mentioned it was the first time you started feeling like some semblance of getting toward product market fit. How do you take those initial interactions from that MVP and those people using the checklist and going through those learning opportunities and getting gigs, getting jobs? How did you take that and actually turn it into an organization, an entity, and actually something that's repeatable where you can grow from there? What were some of the steps that you took to make those decisions, and what did you do next?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So I had the intention early on, like basically from the start, like this should be a nonprofit. It makes sense because then things are simple, and simplicity is extremely important. I often hear people like give me like an elevator pitch for like their project, and there are too many elements to it. It's simple to say it's free coding resources that people donate to support. Like that's all freeCodeCamp is essentially. It's just people turning around and donating. They get a job or something, and then they're like, okay, I'll donate to support freeCodeCamp. So to answer your question, does that answer your question?
So that's step one. You decided it's going to be a nonprofit. Sounds like that was a critical decision. Yeah. But
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I was just having a little bit of lapse in terms of my working memory. So yeah, because I knew that we weren't going to go the VC route, because if we're a 501c3 donor-supported public charity, there's no ownership equity. Like even I don't own any equity. Like you two own as much equity in freeCodeCamp as I do. So as a result, there was no incentive for people to fund it. I had been hustling for like years, just buying and selling things. I'd buy things on Craigslist and I sell them on eBay, mostly like retro video games and stuff. And I had saved up like $150,000, and I was going to use that to buy a house. My wife and keep in mind, my wife was working at this time. Like we had her benefits. This wasn't just me doing everything. Like I was her dependent during this period of experimentation. So again, when we talk about luck and privilege and things like that, like I had a lot of flexibility that somebody, most people wouldn't have. And keep in mind, like I was 30 when I started learning the code. I'm 40 now. So I was like 33, 34 when freeCodeCamp started off. So I had already had time to accrue some money, right? And so I used that $150,000 over the course of the first 2 years or so to just keep the organization afloat, pay for servers, pay people to essentially help me with the code base, because my skills were still fairly nascent with like the specific tools like Loopback and Node.js and React and things like that we were using. So because there wasn't VC potential, or because there wasn't the potential for like angels or anything like that, like it was basically just however much I can fund this. And we just had to get to tax season status as quickly as possible. Then we'd be able to start accepting donations, and we could have technically accepted donations before then, but they wouldn't have been tax deductible, and it would have felt weird. Like, why should people give donations to a nonprofit, right? Like, so anyway, yeah, once we got that, we were able to break through, and that was our path to sustainability.
Got it. So I want to dig in then a little bit into the tactics of growth, and then I also want to talk about, we're going to talk about operations of the business, how you systemize some of these things, and your thoughts on education as well. But you had this, I guess, content strategy that was working for you. That's how you establish yourself. But still, going from 10,000 followers on Twitter, for example, to hundreds of thousands and getting a much bigger community behind you takes pretty deliberate work. So what were some of the things that you did, let's say, on a weekly basis to make sure that you're continuing to gain awareness about this resource that's available for people? It sounds like word of mouth was part of it. The stickiness was part of it. People were sharing. But what else were you doing tactically to continue on the growth path?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of little incremental things, doing stuff that doesn't scale, so to speak. For example, anybody who emailed me, anybody who messaged me on Twitter, anywhere, like, I'd always take the time to reply to them. And it's not like stock, like, replies. It's usually like I'm typing them a message off the top of my head, like, oh, hey, try this, And I think that kind of engendered some goodwill. Just having, I've exchanged emails with probably at this point, like, maybe tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 or more people from the community that have emailed me. And so I spend a huge amount of time just in my inbox every day, just replying to people. And I send a lot of emails proactively. Like, if somebody donates like a large sum of money, I like email them, like, hey, I want to learn more about you. It's not like some bot thanking them or anything. We do send them like an automated receipt, but I try to make a point as the founder of the organization to kind of be like a mascot or an ambassador to the organization. And so doing a lot of those things that don't scale, that's helped a lot. Of course, like, I did create an email list 5 years ago today, actually. It's the 5th year anniversary. It just happened to fall on a Monday. I'm going to announce that in my Friday email blast this week that it's 5 years in. But and that's grown a lot. So people just opt in, and I send them 5 links, all of which are things that the freeCodeCamp community has created or published. And another thing that I spent a huge amount of time on is just working directly with volunteers. So if somebody wants to write articles, I meet with them and I'm like, okay, great. Like, here's how to get started. Or I meet with people that just want to volunteer and don't know how to best volunteer. And I ask them what they're interested in and matchmake, the volunteers to the work, if you will. And then a lot of the growth has been leveraging platforms, if you will. I used Quora very extensively early on to just answer common programming related questions. And that was one of the ways I was able to build up my reputation as somebody who knew what they were talking about. And a lot of people heard about freeCodeCamp just by virtue of following me on Quora. And then Medium, we were one of the early adopters of Medium, and we had a publication on Medium that was subdomained to freeCodeCamp. So it was medium.freecodecamp.org. And at one point we were doing about 10% of all traffic to Medium was to our publication. Wow. So that was a big source, because Medium was sending traffic as well. And then we were sending traffic, everybody was going there, but like the additional boost we were getting from Medium definitely helped. And then YouTube now is like the main, like, really that's the only platform we're dependent on now at this point. We've weaned ourselves off of like Discord and Medium and a lot of these other platforms, but there's not really anywhere to go with YouTube unless we want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year serving HD video. So that has been a big discovery engine for freeCodeCamp, is people just encountering freeCodeCamp videos in their YouTube recommendations or in YouTube search.
So then, for example, let's take the Medium example because it's 10% of their traffic. Sounds like a lot. What was your cadence? How often were you posting content? Were you the primary contributor? Was the team helping out there as well?
I think I wrote like maybe 400 or 500 articles on Medium. So that's, I was doing it almost every day. I'd sit down and write. And that's the thing is like, At what point do you like pull back and just focus on being an operator behind the scenes rather than being kind of on the front line, like trying to advance to capture more area? It's hard. I mean, I've kind of done that more recently. I'm more focused on helping empower other people to contribute. But I was the sole editor for a long time, and I would edit maybe like 2 or 3 articles a day, publish those, and coordinate with the authors. And then I would write like an article. So it was just like a really, really long tutorial grind, essentially, just creating like tons of tutorials. But I think that I think when we left Medium, we had about 5,000 articles, and I'd written maybe like 400 or 500 of them. So that gives you an idea of like I had succeeded in delegating a lot and getting more contributors in. It wasn't just me. And then we built out an editorial team and everything as well.
And these were like volunteers or people that were part of the team, or both?
Initially, they were volunteers, and now we have a person who basically full-time leads the editorial team, and then me and one other person also help with the editing.
Got it. So to recap, it sounds like you doubled down on the community building side of things. You doubled down on content, and not just like an article a week, several articles every single day, and then pulling in people from the community to help you scale out that process. And you picked a couple of core platforms, core being one of them, Medium being another one, now YouTube as well, to focus your growth around, because that's where your audience was. And you did a lot of work to go deep on that. I don't want that to go understated. I mean, that's hours and hours every single week on just doing that work. That's how you set yourself up for success in the long run. And you said yourself, these things are small and incremental, but they compound over time. That's important not to glaze over. But one really impressive stat that we keep on seeing about freeCodeCamp is the fact that you've been able to do all this on a very lean team and a very lean budget. I know you didn't even pay yourself for a number of years, and you did mention you were fortunate enough to have created that setup for yourself. I will say, I mean, you did, I'm sure buying and selling stuff on Craigslist, that's also, maybe that was fun, but in part that is very diligent work to be able to get to a point where you save enough money to then be able to dedicate your time on this. And obviously your wife was supportive as well. But talk about the team and operations of the business and the nonprofit. How did you get it to the point where you have so much impact, so many people, only 12 people on the team? That sounds pretty incredible to me.
Yeah. Well, I started out doing everything myself. And I think that that's an important thing as a founder. Like the captain of a ship should have done everything. Like they should have swabbed the deck, right? They should have, what are the words, like helmed the ship. They should have gone around and like maintained all the different ropes and all the timber and everything. And like that's a weird analogy, but if you think about it, like generally, historically, that's how it works. Like the person at the top, you can respect that person. You can take their advice because they can empathize with you and whatever you're working on because they've done it themselves. Like I did all the support for freeCodeCamp for the first 5 years. Like every single support email, I took care of myself. And I was the only person with access to the production database, for example, to like fix records and stuff like that. And as we gradually expanded, I was able to delegate some of those things. But I wrote almost all the original code myself, so I still have it's progressed and evolved quite a bit since then. But I still have like some intuition for where things are, and like I understand a lot of the design decisions in terms of like how we've architected the site. So I would say like one of the big things is just do everything yourself first, and then take volunteers and promote them to employees, essentially, to full-time staff. So what we did is I would just like a good example is Abby. So she just finished grad school and she was just hanging out, traveling around with her husband, who was a software engineer. And they were in Europe, and she just reached out to me and she's like, "Hey, can I help with the editing articles?" And I was like, "Sure, I'd love your help." So we met frequently and we just pair edited, and I taught her everything I knew. And then at some point she took over and was doing a more editing than I was, and we were able to bring her on. And then Bo Carnes was running his own YouTube channel and it was called I think JS Nuggets or something like that, like JavaScript Nuggets. And it was going pretty well, but I was just really impressed with what he was doing. And I was like, look, man, if you can help us build out our YouTube channel and apply that kind of teaching skill. He was a special ed teacher at a high school, and he did it. And like now, like a lot of the growth of freeCodeCamp's channel is directly attributable to his thoughtfulness and a lot of his ideas. And he and I together, we've just bounced ideas off one another and really come up with kind of like a mental model of how people who want to learn to code on YouTube, how they operate, what they're thinking, and how to meet them where they are, rather than, have some pie in the sky that they can't reach. So the same thing with like Mukesh Mohapatra, who he was a big contributor, and I was able to encourage him, like convince him to leave like a big multinational corporation in India. And he did it, and he joined the freeCodeCamp team, and he took a huge chance, right? He was like getting newly married and everything, and his family thought he was crazy, but he did it. And of course, everything's worked out. And he's making all kinds of architectural decisions way beyond what he would have had the latitude to do in a much larger organization. So just identifying, there's the saying that like founders really only have 3 jobs: set the vision, don't run out of money, and find the right people. And I think like of all the things, finding the right people, that's the thing I think I take my most pride in, and I feel that I'm the best at. Not best overall, but like of those skills, I think that's the skill that I've got my stats most leveled up on.
Very cool. I'm curious, and this is a question from Uche that came in from an audience member. By the way, folks, if you have questions you want to make sure we ask of Quincy, please type it into the chat. But he's wondering, with all these things that you had going on, how did you actually get consistent on the things that you knew you had to get done day to day, like publishing of the articles, or making sure you're continuing to grow, making sure you're recruiting the right volunteers and stuff? How did you keep consistent?
Well, I learned this from a doctor that I was like interpreting for back maybe like 10 years ago. He would work every day, and his wife was like she thought he was a little crazy, but he was very happy just working every day. And what he would do is he'd work like maybe like 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, which adds up to about, 40 hours, which is what a normal person works, except a normal person, like maybe works like 8 to 10 hours, 5 days a week. And then they take the weekend off. And to some extent, when you take a weekend off, yeah, you're like recharging your batteries, but you're also losing a little bit of momentum. So if you just never take a day off, you never lose any momentum, and you just kind of keep incrementally building. So that's been one of my secrets. Like I never take a day off. Even when my kids were born, I would be in the hospital, holding one arm and like getting things done with my other arm, just a few hours a day to keep up tempo. Don't have any 0 days. Just try to like keep up that pace. But I found that, and just getting enough sleep, getting exercise, like doing all the things that you theoretically wouldn't have time for. Well, if you only work like 40 or 50 hours a week, you actually do have time for them. Now, I'm not going to lie. Like early on, I was working like 80, 90 hours a week. There were some weeks that I just, aside from sleeping, all I did was work. But those were like the hell weeks where like the servers were having problems, or we just had like this huge burst of activity. Like one point, believe it or not, we've been like in all these different publications. But the one publication that was the biggest thing for us that really caused a surge in visitors was Lifehacker, of all things. Like when we were in Lifehacker, that was like a much bigger impact than like name brand magazines and stuff like that. So
how much traffic did you get after that publication, if you remember?
We went from getting about 100 to 200 concurrents. The day that got published, we jumped up to like 600. And I remember because I was in a movie theater and I was like watching a movie, and like I just pulled out my phone and like looked, and I was like, oh my God, we've got like the servers were down. And I ran out and I got on the phone, and like I was trying to like get back to my house as quickly as I could so I'd have a good internet connection and be able to like jump into the AWS or whatever it was we were using at the time and start scaling things up. But yeah, that was a really big inflection point. and it's just like there's a series of inflection points. It's almost kind of like bounces, right? Like it comes in waves. Like for example, when the pandemic happened, when the U.S. went into lockdown in May, now a lot of people were still kind of under the illusion like, oh, this is not going to be that big of a deal. But by the time like things actually properly shut down in May, everybody realized like, well, I could be spending months here in my home. I'm going to learn something, right? And there was this article that we published like that just went completely viral. It had like 2 million views within like a week or something, just crazy. Well, like even by our standards, like it was, and our Alexa rank, just that article alone, like rocket our Alexa rank way up. But of course, things always kind of, those are always like one-time boosts. And then you return, and hopefully the baseline that you return to is a little bit higher. But that was the case with this. Like, so you, in many ways, you think of like a sine wave that's kind of like up and to the right a little bit. That's whenever you're doing like I guess like instructional content focused growth. Because freeCodeCamp itself, like we might get to the top of Reddit and everybody's like, oh, cool, there's this free curriculum that I can go through to learn the program. And we'll have like a big burst of activity. But it's hard to actually find people that stick around and keep doing it. And that's just because it's hard. Like we're not going to tell people it's easy to program. It's hard. And it's going to take a lot of practice and a lot of, temerity to be able to, temerity, am I using that word right? To hang in there.
Yeah, sounds right to me anyways. Yeah, that's, we think that actually the fact that you have a free resource for people to learn how to code is so valuable because not everybody is going to be a coder, but the fact that you can be a self-starter and start picking up some of these technical skills will make you that much better for other jobs that are maybe not even technical, right? Like operations roles, for example, oftentimes do require for you to be at least a little bit technical if you're running SQL queries, for example, and that's really, really helpful. Nicholas had the next question. What did you take away from your corporate job? Are there any skills that are most important in that setting? In other words, what do you think you learned, I think, in that corporate job that maybe you wouldn't have learned in another setting?
Yeah, process. I think the optimal organization structure for most endeavors is probably something like a military, where you've got like you've got a chain of command, you've got a hierarchy, you've got standard peer groups and things like that you can look to and learn from. You have like a path to like promotion and all that stuff. And like, unfortunately, freeCodeCamp doesn't have the resources to become like a giant bureaucratic company. But I saw the merit in that because at the same time as I was like lamenting how long it took to get things done, you see organizations like WeWork that are purely charisma driven, and you've got this kind of charismatic leader who leads the entire organization astray. And there's not really any checks and balances for that charisma when you don't have process in place. So process straitjackets you, and it makes sure that you can't go, breakneck speeds, but at the same time, you're not going to start totally dragging. It's just like dependability. And that's one of the things I've come to appreciate from just how government works and how large corporations work in general is like dependability is the main thing that people optimize for. They just want things to be relatively deterministic when they make decisions. They want to be able to plan and budget and have things come out more or less how they want. They'd much rather take like a conservative but likely payout than I can't think of many organizations like Google's a counterpoint where they just have this extremely stable source of revenue, search ads, right? And as a result, they can basically just do tons of spikes, what we call spikes in agile software development, where you just have a team just go crazy. What do they call them? They call them moonshots, right? Like very few organizations actually do that in practice because they probably don't have like a monopolistic, source of revenue that's, generating more revenue than like most companies would ever get, even if they were extremely lucky, right? So, I would say that was the big lesson I learned. I worked at a giant like Japanese corporation that had like subsidiaries all throughout the world, and so the school I was running was like just one of 50-ish schools in the United States, which was one of hundreds of schools that this Japanese corporation ultimately managed. And just understanding my place in the hierarchy and what my role was, it invoked humility, but it also made me appreciate like the people that worked really hard over the course of like 20 years to get into the leadership. And it was very like, it wasn't age based, but it was very seniority based. Like the people who were in charge were all older, and they had demonstrated loyalty and kind of like staying power, if you will, to get there. And it's similar in the military, you know, like it's not like, you know, Star Trek where like Captain Picard just becomes the captain all of a sudden, because why not? You know, if you saw the reboot movie from maybe 10 years ago, that's what happens. In real life, you know, you've got to work really hard and you've got to prove yourself over and over again, and you've got to gain the esteem of your peers. You have to follow the rules, and then you can gradually get promoted. And to some extent I was like, oh, but this is startup land, I don't need to do that. And then once I started doing these projects, I started to realize the merit and that kind of more, I guess, conservative, like traditional corporate ideology that has governed most companies. And there are aspects that, you know, you don't have to take all of it, right? You can pick and choose. Like you don't have to take like, you know, family-based succession, for example. I think that's kind of a backward thing that doesn't need to exist. But, you know, if you look at a lot of like the kind of longer running nonprofits like the YMCA, like the Red Cross, like Doctors Without Borders, you know, they've got a very hierarchical, process oriented management style as well. So I think freeCodeCamp will eventually come to resemble those. Right now, it's basically just me and a whole bunch of people working directly under me, reporting directly to me. But once we have more resources, we'll probably become more conventional.
That's I appreciate that. You're absolutely right. Process is critical. We had a question come in from Michael, which is, what advice would you give to a younger 20-year-old version of yourself? Which I think is an interesting question, because you did have a very eclectic background. You went from, you know, non-technical roles to running a school, to then becoming an engineer, to then starting a venture of your own, this you know, global nonprofit now that has global impact. What do you think you would tell something for your 20-year-old self to kind of prepare yourself for that, or to do something differently, perhaps? 2 words: patience and planning. That's like, people ask what my edge is. I'm not the smartest guy. I'm not the most charismatic guy. I'm definitely not the most high energy guy. Like I've met people that are incredibly prolific, that learn very quickly, that get extremely passionate about things. But I guess the one edge is I'm very consistent, and I think really far ahead, and I am patient. And so my advice to you as a 20-year-old, your productive career, like assuming that, you know, medical developments continue to go forward and you're lucky, and you're not unlucky, I guess, you may have like 60 to 80 years of productive life ahead of you. Where would you like to be 20 years from now? Where would you like to be 40 years from now? If you think in those timelines, of course, the farther you go out, the more it's just guessing, and the harder it becomes to really predict with any degree of accuracy. But you know, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And if you can invent yourself, that's an Alan Kay quote. I didn't come up with that. Then you can have some degree of control over your destiny, right? So you can pick up the skills that you want. My humble advice to people is, don't try to start a nonprofit, like, or a startup or anything like that, like right out of the gates. Take it slow and work for somebody else, make mistakes on their dollar, so to speak, and build up your professional network, build up your skills. And then when you're in a good position, that's when you can take a shot. And I mean, 30s, 40s, those are good ages, particularly, especially if you don't have kids. And I didn't have kids when I started. I have kids now. If I'd had kids, freeCodeCamp probably wouldn't exist, because kids really do change things. But assuming you don't have kids yet, then see if you can hold off on kids and really just focus on personal development, and then have kids in your 30s, and start your nonprofit before you have kids, if you have that ability, or your startup. That would be my humble advice. Yeah, actually, we've met parents before that started companies while, you know, after they had kids. Two moms, co-founders, the founders of Slumberkins, who we had on the podcast last year, both started their companies, their company while I think one of them had 3 kids, the other had 2. Now they had husbands that helped support them in their endeavors, et cetera. In the first critical year, they had some savings, kind of like yourself. But I think that's sound advice there. And you know, I think the thing that you said that really resonated with me is patience. I think a lot of young people, they start off and they feel like they have to have everything perfectly planned, but you don't know the ebbs and flows that your career is going to take. You don't know what interests you're going to change, you're going to have, and how that's going to change and evolve as you learn more about the world and get some context around jobs and professions. Actually, part of the reason why we started School 16 is because universities are kind of really bad at helping you get that context, the professional context of what working life is actually going to be like. And I think that's really, really important. Patience, because you can't really plan everything to a T. You should have a plan, but you should have an open mind as well.
So to wrap up the conversation, Quincy, because we're getting to the top of the hour here, and I appreciate you staying a little late with us. I had a question about your thoughts on education. And I guess more specifically, I mean, you were an educator for so long. You led a school. You then led an organization where people essentially took education into their own hands. And I'm curious how you're thinking about the future of education as it pertains to how people will learn in the future, and maybe what role freeCodeCamp may have in that, because I know you're expanding your curriculum and the like to address some of that too. But do you think people will learn a little bit different in the future, and how are you thinking about that? You mentioned the different mental models, for example, in terms of learning how to code, but maybe even broader, what do you think will be a more effective way for people to learn?
I think that the biggest problem with education, other than the fact that it's really expensive, it's way more expensive than, in my humble opinion, it needs to be. I think there are some tons of cost savings opportunities. There's a lot of unnecessary kind of noise around education that doesn't actually contribute to learning and to getting a good job. And I'm not saying like arts, I'm talking about like university sports and like fancy buildings and things like that. Like that stuff is not correlated with academic success, to my knowledge. What matters is people actually spending time with teachers and spending time with their peers and building projects and doing research and applying what they're learning, right? And having a tight feedback loop. So I think that aside from cost, the biggest problem is it probably as a result of the cost, education is compressed. And we think about university as 4 years and then you're done and you're like, hey, I'm working now. And maybe I do like a few continuing professional development, hours a year where I sit down with my peers and maybe like learn a couple things and give a talk to them and they give a talk to us. I feel like that's just like, there's so many missed opportunities. I think that an ideal structure would be something like where people, by the time they finish high school, they immediately start working and they just do an hour or two a day of school, and that just continues indefinitely, like while you're working. It's just like a continual renewal of your skills, and as you gain more skills, maybe certifications, maybe just demonstrated performance through to your in your job, you continue to rise within an organization or get jobs that are increasingly technical or increasingly require more and more skills and more abilities. And you just continue to kind of taper the direction you want to go based on that. The current system, you go in as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old here in the United States. This is how the US works. And you choose a major, you choose your courses yourself. Who knows if you chose the wrong electives? Who knows if you chose the wrong major and you're going to end up not having as much opportunity? The difference between getting like a 4-year degree in like computer science and getting a 4-year degree in something like Spanish, it's basically like 2x earning potential for computer science, maybe more. So just that decision that you're not really well equipped to make as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old who doesn't necessarily even understand what they're supposed to learn. I think if you were to just start doing a job that doesn't require as much training, and then gradually skill up from there and follow your interests and maybe consult more with career counselors throughout your entire career, as opposed to just having it be like this discrete step on your way to adulthood, I think that'd be way better. So how do we get to that? Well, I think it's a combination of like online learning and probably in-person learning that is convenient, not where you're getting in a car and driving to a university, but on your way home, just like you go home, there's like a gym on the way home and you can work out on your way home, right? Like some sort of learning center. And that doesn't have to be fancy. That could just be a few tables and chairs and maybe a whiteboard, and you bring your laptop there and you start working, and you just talk to people, and they go up there and explain things to you and you explain things to them. A lot of peer learning, maybe some lectures, just like meetups. Meetups are great. Like I've learned as much from just going to different meetups as I probably learned in graduate school. It's really powerful. So I think, what does education look like? Ideally, it's very long, lifelong, and it's extremely inexpensive, because if you're using software to learn, it's essentially infinitely reproducible, and it's basically free, right? I mean, freeCodeCamp is certainly striving to make a lot of these vocational skills like programming freely available. And now, of course, data science and advanced math and machine learning. Like, so we're building the data science curriculum thanks in large part to Daryl Silver's contribution, and also to the 1,500 people who've donated so far to the pledge drive. So if you're curious about that, I don't know if you gentlemen are able to put like a link in the description, but we welcome your help with that. But that's really just the beginning. Eventually, we're going to teach English for people that are non-native English speakers that have just done like high school English, like basically a finishing school for English. We're eventually going to teach, very fundamental like accounting and economics and finance, like the kind of spreadsheet skills that you would need. It's nothing industry specific or domain specific, just the raw basic building blocks that people could then build upon and go get a degree in addition to things like that. So I think that the future of education is convenient and low cost, and just tons of contact hours. Way more, like you take that 4 hours, that 4 years of a university degree, that's maybe 6,000 hours of total study. What if you exploded that out and you spread that across 20 years? First of all, you could probably double the amount of hours, and you could double the amount of content or time that you spent with specific instructional content. So I think it'll result in much better outcomes, and we'll have much more competent people, and we won't have as many people slipping through the cracks if we have this system where anybody can kind of get back on the train instead of having to go into debt and drop what they're doing and go back to school. Like right now, there's a reason why so few people go to school after like age 25. And it's because there's like switching costs essentially. So we're gonna beat down those transaction costs and the switching costs, and make it just where it's not that big of a deal to re-enroll in learning something.
Well, we're really excited to continue to follow what freeCodeCamp is doing with machine learning and data science now. We dropped a link into the chat, freecodecamp.org. We're going to, of course, include that in the description of the podcast episode when that goes live. Is there a direct link where people can donate as well?
Yeah, if you just go to freecodecamp.org/donate, you can sign up to get basically to give us $5 a month. We just have a single donation tier. And that's because it's simple. Everything is about simple. And like the moment you add a whole bunch of you get decision paralysis and churn. $5 isn't that much. This is like some unsolicited advice for anybody who's thinking about starting like a donor supported nonprofit. Monthly recurring donations. Keep them relatively small, keep them manageable where pretty much anybody can get involved, and they're unlikely to churn if it's a small amount. So if you go to freecodecamp.org/donate.
That's excellent. Well, we're excited to follow your journey, Quincy. Thank you so much for all the wisdom that you shared today. It certainly resonates with us. We're glad that someone like you is seeing the success, and we're looking forward to seeing you penetrate different areas. I think you also probably have a future in education policy. I don't know if you want to go that route, but we need somebody like you that's helping people actually make decisions so that in the future that foundational element can change too. But hey, maybe that's down the line, and maybe we'll join you there too.
I'll take that as a compliment. But yeah, I'm very much focused on just trying to get this nonprofit to be as helpful as possible, help as many people as possible. I don't know if I'd be good in the public sector.
Yeah, well, likewise, but you never know. Never say never, as we like to say. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for who tuned in live to the Mentors podcast. We appreciate you joining us. This episode will be published live within the next few weeks. And again, thanks so much for your time, Quincy. freecodecamp.org. check out their free resources, check out their YouTube channel. And if you can, please do donate. It is impacting a lot of lives, and hopefully it can impact your own as well. Thank you so much, Quincy.
Thank you, Vadim. Thank you, Sergey.
Cheers. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We'll see you soon.
All right.
Alrighty.
All right. So I just peace out.
Yeah,
I hope my answers weren't too verbose. I mean, I was painfully aware, like, man, I'm talking a lot. But you all were being good interviewers, and you just like ask questions and like wind me up and like set me. You know.
No, it was excellent. We thought you did a great job providing a lot of context, which I think is important. I mean, that's what people are here for. That's why people listen to our show, by the way, too. They're curious about the details, and they don't like it when people gloss over those important details. You talked about the challenges, the reality of the challenges, which I really always appreciate. So